This is the Charybdis, and I did not think I was going to like this keyboard as much as I have. It's kind of big, it's 3D printed, I have to mess with the QMK firmware, but I can't get myself torn away from this keyboard because, yeah, probably you've guessed it, the trackball. As someone who has raved about the Glove80, and don't get me wrong, the Glove80 is still an excellent keyboard and more comfortable, in my opinion, than the Charybdis. Almost forgot what it was called there. I will only do a thorough review on a keyboard if I have actually used it for my day-to-day work for at least like 2 weeks, long enough to get somewhat familiar with the keyboard. But we've blown way past that 2 to 3 week period, and I've been using this keyboard for at least 6 months. I did not expect that I would like this keyboard as much as I have. As a disclaimer, this keyboard was sent to me for free by Bastard Keyboards, but no money exchanged hands, and these thoughts and opinions are my own. They are seeing this review video at the same time that everyone else who will bother watching this video will see it, which might be hundreds of you. So what makes the Charybdis different than other keyboards? And when I ask that question, what I really mean is what makes the Charybdis different than the Glove80 or the Advantage 360 Pro. And I bring up these three keyboards specifically because of the concave keywell, and there's not a lot of options with the concave keywell. And the answer is obviously it's the trackball, right? It's the trackball. Aside from the trackball, the Charybdis does have a more DIY feel to it since the case is 3D printed. And in my opinion, with 3D printed, it's never going to feel as good or as premium as something that has mold injected parts like the Glove80 or the Kinesis Advantage 360. With that said, it is totally functional, and the quality of this 3D print, in my opinion, is pretty good. In fact, I did try 3D printing this case myself, and even though I was successful, I'm not sure if the quality of this is any better than what I got off of my 3D printer here. In fact, I would say this is probably better. So my 3D print is right here. It's just the shell. I never ended up using it. And I tried doing things to it to make it look a little nicer, like sanding it down and trying to polish it to make it look like it wasn't 3D printed. And I don't know, I think I did an okay job, but it feels DIY. But anyways, let's talk about the trackball. I've mentioned this in several of my videos, just how much I really enjoy using this trackball. Having the trackball on the keyboard integrated with the keyboard it's awesome. I don't know. I can't think of other words for that. It's great. It's a great experience. I still miss the cozy feel of the Glove80 and just how comfortable it is to type on this keyboard. And I know I released a video where I said that with the Glove80 and the Ploopy Adept right here, this trackball, that I got a massive RSI flare-up. And that is true, but I totally blame it on the Ploopy Adept. And by blame it on the Ploopy Adept, I mean I blame it on how I was using the Ploopy Adept. And I think that is actually an important note. I would bet for most people, you would probably not get an RSI flare-up like I did using the Ploopy Adept. For me, in my specific circumstances, the Ploopy Adept gave me a pretty bad RSI flare-up, but I still love this keyboard, and I would still really like to go back to this keyboard just for the aforementioned reason of it feels really good to type on. And also, I'll be honest, these 4 keys right here, I miss having dedicated arrow keys. With that said, how does having an integrated trackball into the keyboard change my daily habits, my daily workflows? Obviously, I spend a lot less time reaching over for the mouse. And it seems like one of those things that probably wouldn't make that big of a difference, the time saving between moving your hand from the keyboard to a mouse or a trackpad or a dedicated trackball. But I think it really does add up. Some other interesting things about using the trackball on the keyboard rather than a dedicated pointing device is that with a dedicated pointing device, such as, I guess I'll just use the Ploopy Adept here again, is when you have a dedicated pointing device, you use the same hand to move the cursor around as you do to do the different clicks. And you don't necessarily need to set it up this way on a keyboard that has a dedicated pointing device, but the way that I've done it and I've set it up is I've separated the moving around of my cursor with this hand, and clicking, I have mainly moved to the other keyboard. So those two actions are now separate things. And for me, that's been really nice. So just going back to the Ploopy Adept here, I think the main reason why I got such a bad RSI flare-up with this trackball is because a lot of the time my hand was not free to move the cursor around, but instead I was holding down a mouse press. So like, for instance, I had this key right here. When I pushed this switch, it would activate scroll mode. It's a little hard to show with me standing here and not having the Ploopy Adept on my desk. But my point is that often I was having to hold down a key with one of my fingers while also trying to move the trackball. And this was just not working for me. Where on the Charybdis, my fingers were free to move the cursor around without having to hold down other buttons at the same time. And I think this made a really big difference. And if you're wondering how I set this up, on this side of the keyboard, when I push this key right here, it activates what I call my pointing layer. And so when my pointing layer is active, then these two keys right here become my left click and my right click. And I also have the middle mouse button, and on this side, I have these two keys set up to be my back button and my forward button. And also when I have my pointing layer active, when I push Z, that toggles on scrolling, which is also an awesome benefit that when scrolling is active, this becomes scrolling. It scrolls. You can scroll up and down or right and left. On my old mouse, which is this Logitech MX Master 3S, it does have this scroll wheel right here to do side scrolling, but it's really nice being able to have it in just one trackball. One thing I have found to be quite frustrating is often when I activate scrolling and then start scrolling with the trackball is it'll just randomly stop, and I'll have to toggle off scrolling and then toggle it back on, and then I'll start scrolling again. And it just seems to be this constant battle with getting scrolling to work reliably. And I think this has more to do with QMK than it does the keyboard itself, because I found the same problem on the Ploopy Adept, which also runs QMK. So other than that one kind of frustrating quirk, the trackball is just, I don't know, can I say it enough? It's been awesome. And it is the one thing, it is literally the one thing that is stopping me from going back to the Glove80. So other than the annoying inconsistency of tracking with the trackball, there is another case or another reason why the trackball might not be good for you. It just depends on your use case. For me, as a software engineer and someone who uses Vim, I spend a lot of time in my terminal. I'm also a backend engineer, so I don't spend a lot of time in the web browser working with user interfaces. But if you are someone who uses the mouse a lot, for instance, if you do a lot of video editing or do a lot of work with CAD software or stuff in like Affinity Photo or Photoshop, then yeah, you're going to use the trackball quite a bit. And I have found for myself, when I've used the trackball working in DaVinci Resolve to do video editing or in Affinity Photo, as I like to do photography as my own little hobby. So I am always editing photos, and I also have done a bunch of CAD work in Fusion 360 to work on different 3D models for just, random stuff around my house. I've used the trackball for extended periods of time doing all of those things, and my fingers definitely start to feel it after extended use. The way that I like to use the trackball is with my index finger and my thumb, and this feels really comfortable. I think that you might supposed to use the trackball with your palm because it does sit under your palm, but that, I don't know, that feels really unnatural to me. Do any of you use this keyboard with your palm? I don't know. But because I am an index and thumb user for the trackball, my two fingers right here, they just naturally rest on the keyboard in the spot. And I tend to bend them like that when I'm using the trackball. So me personally, I feel the most discomfort in these two fingers. But also, if you use your thumb exclusively, which some people do, there are a lot of mice out there that have the trackball here on the thumb and you use it exclusively with your thumb. So if you're used to doing that and you carry that habit over to the Charybdis, then yeah, like this would get uncomfortable. So just be aware, if you are a heavy mouse or trackball user, then switching to the Charybdis may not be the right decision for you. And I am not an expert on trackballs. It's definitely not my forte, but from what I understand, bigger balls are usually better balls. So on the Plupi Adept, the trackball is bigger than the one on the Charybdis. Here's a size comparison for you. So I think there is a case to make that a bigger ball is probably easier to use. Honestly, I don't know. If you know, then please tell me in the comments. But in my personal experience, I find that using the Charybdis's trackball is a lot easier than using this trackball. And there's a reason for that, and it's because of the sniping feature that you have on the Charybdis. So what is sniping? It's basically a toggle that you can use to decrease the DPI of your cursor. So let's say most people set their DPI for like 800. I don't know if that is true, but let's just say for this example, it's a DPI of 800. When you toggle on sniping, it decreases that DPI by some factor, maybe like half. So toggling sniping on would change that DPI from 800 down to 400. As I've mentioned, both the Plupi Adept and the Charybdis both run QMK, so it is possible. In fact, I did set this up so that I could toggle on sniping with the Plupi Adept, but it was a lot more difficult, and I had to program a button on the Plupi Adept itself to toggle that sniping feature on. However, on the Charybdis, I have it set up so that whenever I activate my pointing layer, it automatically toggles on sniping, and that makes a really nice and comfortable workflow. I'll just be moving my cursor like normal, but then when I get to something that I want to click on, I can activate the pointing layer and it'll automatically slow down my cursor speed so that I can hone in on what I want to click more precisely. The other nice thing about the Charybdis is you can configure all of this through QMK, which we'll get to that. It's nice, but also it's extremely painful. One other note about the trackball before we move on to other things is when I first started using it, there was definitely some grittiness and resistance to using a trackball. Like it did not glide super smoothly, but over time it broke in, and now this is pretty smooth. So let's talk about QMK. Oh boy. This comes up whenever I'm talking about a keyboard that is more of the DIY nature, like the Charybdis. So if you were really ambitious, you could go and source all of the parts yourself for this keyboard. You could print the case, get the PCBs, and you could put it together without ever interacting with bastard keyboards. But with that said, because of the open source nature of this keyboard, is you're also at the mercy of the quality of the open source software that is available to the community in order to program this keyboard. And as I'm pretty sure I've mentioned in other videos where I've talked about just how terrible the software for keyboards can be. So ZMK, I think, actually has a really good open source alternative for programming your keyboard. And that is what I personally use to program my Glove80. However, when it comes to QMK, the software is just, it's awful. It's terrible. So yes, you can go to usevia, I think is what it is, usevia.com. Sorry, it's usevia.app. And you can use this website to program your keyboard. And the one nice thing about it is the changes do happen immediately, but you are so limited by the software that it's not, I don't even think it is worth using. Alternatively, you can go to config.qmk.fm, and there is also a layout configurator there, which in my opinion is a lot better, or at least more featureful than usevia.app, but it's still just not a great experience. In my experience, it's not a good experience. So for me personally, if I'm going to use a keyboard like this, I would rather just compile the firmware on my computer and just manage my layout through code. I do not like doing it that way, but to get the most out of my keyboard, I feel like I have to, like I don't have any other choice. And I would say that's even more so applicable to the Charybdis or other keyboards that have custom functionality on it, such as the different settings that are available to control the trackball are settings or configuration values that are not going to be available in some of these off-the-shelf open source layout configurators. I think you might be able to get away with that using config.qmk.fm, but definitely in my experience, unless there's something I just totally missed, it's not possible to do that in usevia. The software, in my opinion, is the number one thing holding people back from adopting keyboards like this. I surmise that keyboard companies like ZSA and Digma are in large part successful and popular because of their layout configurators. If there are different settings that you need to tweak, you don't have to go digging through the documentation of ZMK or QMK to find that one weird little config value that you need to put in that specific little file, and you have to manually edit your config and then compile it locally in order to unlock that functionality on your keyboard. Like, they don't have that problem. The trade-off there is if there is some kind of deep customization that you want to do to your keyboard, then you can't do that without being able to go and manually edit the config files yourself. But I would safely bet that the majority of people are not interested in doing that. And it probably takes a special individual, such as myself, to go and manually maintain your configuration files in this massive QMK config repository, and you have to download all these other tools, and like it's a pain in the butt. If you get this keyboard in the kit and do the soldering yourself, then I don't know that I can really speak on this because it's been so long since I put it together. I did get the kit and I did solder and assemble this keyboard myself. While there are instructions for how to assemble everything and it's all there, it was a little confusing. There were a couple points when I was not entirely sure what I needed to do, and I had to go to resources outside of the build guide in order to get answers. I guess the good news is the answers are out there, and also their Discord is pretty active, and if you get on there and ask questions, well, first of all, I mean, try to find if the question has been answered already. And it's Discord. Discord sucks. Why do we use Discord for these things? Like, it makes no sense to me. Discord's search functionality is an absolute joke. But okay, that's not what this video is about. So calm down, right? Just bring it in. Anyway, yeah. So someone such as myself, who's an introvert and prefers to speak to people as little as humanly possible, I was able to find all of the answers that I needed without interacting with any humans, which was great. After I finished soldering stuff, I think initially there were a couple RGB lights that weren't quite lighting up, and I just had to go and reflow the solder on a couple joints, and then it was working perfectly fine. But another big criticism, maybe not a big criticism, but a criticism nonetheless, when I was putting this thing together, is the ribbon cables. There's a couple ribbon cables that you have to connect, and it gets pretty compact inside, and there isn't a whole lot of room to work with once you put the bottom of the case on. So I did have a problem where I put the ribbon cables in on the wrong side of the PCB, so I had to desolder it and put it back in on the other side. And in that process, because those ribbon cables were so flimsy, the connections broke, and it just I couldn't get it to work. So luckily I had my own wires just sitting around from my own projects, and I was able to put in my own wires, and I didn't even use the ribbon cable. But it would have been nice if the ribbon cable was a little more sturdy. But other than that, the build process was not that bad, and I was able to get through it in a couple hours. As far as overall build quality goes, it's kind of hard to say because like I have been talking about, I pretty much built this myself. And so I also can't speak to the build quality of the keyboard if you get it pre-built from Bastard Keyboards. The keycaps are a double shot ABS, and so it does provide some shine through for the underglow. For the key switches, I provided my own. I don't even know why we talk about key switches when it comes to keyboard reviews, because I mean they're key switches. Like, it has almost nothing to do with the keyboard itself until they're actually in the keyboard. But if you put in crappy key switches, then it's going to make the keyboard crappy. If you put in nice switches, then it's going to make the keyboard better. So I don't know. I don't know why we talk about that. Another thing to mention about the keyboard itself, though, is it does sit kind of high off of the desk. And that can cause problems for some people. It's a little bit of an issue for me. I wish that this was lower to the table, but that is something that is really nice about the Glove80 is it does sit so low. I mean, it doesn't look like it, but because the keywell scoops down, the bottom of the keywell is actually really close to the desk itself. And this part sits on the desk. I don't remember what the distance is between the bottom of the keywell and the bottom of the case, but it's pretty low. The Charybdis, on the other hand, there's quite a bit more space between the bottom of the keywell and the bottom of the Charybdis. Of course, I have made it a little worse by making this custom tenting thing on here that lifts it just slightly even more off of the table. I don't know why I keep saying table, off of my desk. And then there's maybe one last point around long-term ownership is how is this going to hold up over time? And I think the answer is it's going to hold up just as good as any of these other keyboards that I have laying around here. Yeah, it is 3D printed, but I mean, 3D printed stuff can hold up as long as you don't sit this out in a sunny car on your dashboard and let it melt in the sun, because you know that's what PLA tends to do. Then yeah, I think you're going to be just fine. For me to use this keyboard comfortably, I definitely needed to have some kind of tilt, and it's the same thing with any of these keyboards that I've used and reviewed. I personally find it more comfortable when I have my keyboard tented at some kind of angle. I almost forgot that the keyboard actually did come with a little tenting stand here. So this one gives you a 30-degree tent, and the one that I have on my keyboard, it's definitely not 30 degrees. I ended up custom making this one. And I think this is, I want to say like 15 degrees. We'll talk about this here in just a second. But if you go into the GitHub repository for the Charybdis, then there are actually quite a few mods that you can print for the Charybdis. But as far as the tenting angles go, you are limited to what is here in the repository. And right now there's just a 5-degree and a 30-degree plate that you can print. So like I said on here, I did design this one myself. And I don't remember, but I want to say it's like 15 or 20 degrees. But the main reason I wanted to design this, and by design it, I mean just build off of the existing plates or tenting plates that are already in the repository. But I wanted to have a spot where I could add this quick release plate. So having a chair mounted keyboard, or I guess desk mounted keyboard, is still something that I dream of one day in the future. But the Charybdis is actually probably one of the most viable options. In fact, I will go as far as saying it is currently the most viable option that I have personally tried for having a chair or desk mounted keyboard. And the reason goes back to the trackball. The biggest problem that I had with the Glove80 was the fact that, yeah, while I could mount this on my chair and I had the mounting plates in order to do that, and I just have one of these little small rig articulating arms where I could attach my keyboard to this part and the other part to my chair. That part worked, but I still needed to use my mouse pretty often, and it was really uncomfortable, sitting back here using my keyboard and having to reach up in order to use my mouse all the time. It was not comfortable, and the Charybdis completely solves that with the trackball. But there is that other drawback where with the Glove80, it's Bluetooth, so I wouldn't need to have wires connected to my chair. But with the Charybdis, not only do I need wires to power up the keyboard, but I also need the TRRS cable to connect to the two halves, and so I just have wires. It just felt like wires are just all over the place, and they were constantly getting in the way. So I guess maybe it's not that ideal after all. Theoretically, there's a world where I could have a Charybdis with a trackball that is completely wireless and battery powered. And in that world, yeah, this would work. But right now, there's too many cords. They get everywhere. And that is the end of that story. Maybe I'll briefly mention something about gaming. Is if the job that you want this keyboard to do is gaming, I would probably not do it. If you want to do gaming with a split keyboard, then I am admittedly biased, but I would say either the Digma Defy or the Digma Raise 2. The Digma Raise 2 is actually a keyboard that I have not shown on this channel yet, so I still need to test this out. And it's been a little more challenging for me because I am so used to the ortho linear layout where this one has the standard staggered layout. And so I'm just, I can't type on this very well. And also I go through phases where I get addicted to video games and then I'm like into it. And lately I've been doing a really good job at keeping that monster at bay that's inside of me that just wants to play video games all day long and not do anything else. It's one of those things that over time, it slowly wears me down until eventually I break and then I don't get anything done. But I play a lot of video games, and when that happens next, you will be sure to hear something about the Digma Raise 2. Some other things to consider is about portability. This is definitely not a very portable keyboard. It's going to take up a lot of room, especially if you have one that has a more aggressive angle to it. And these don't come off very quickly. It is screwed on there. So you're most likely just going to want to leave this on if you do use a tenting plate. And that'll make it more difficult to port it around. And that aside, I mean, it is kind of a chunky keyboard. If you compare it next to the Glove80, it is bigger. I mean, neither of these are going to be very good for porting around. The Charybdis does not have a carrying case, but I mean, in reality, we're not going to use the cases. A little awkward to, I don't know why it's so awkward to say it. It's not awkward. It's totally fine. Bottom line is it's not going to be like the Voyager where this thing is so small and so portable and something, man, just holding this. I've not held this in a while, and I want to type on it, just holding it. I miss this keyboard. If only it had a third button on the thumb cluster and also maybe a trackball, but then it would get bigger. Man, there's nothing. There's no free lunches when it comes to keyboards, I guess is the point there. I think this keyboard hit so well for me because I'm in that demographic that I think this keyboard was meant for. I spend a lot of time at a computer. I suffer from RSI flare-ups occasionally. I have programming knowledge, so I'm not afraid to get into the firmware and customize my keyboard to my liking. And I already own the equipment and have experience with soldering and doing little small electronics projects. So yeah, this was a big hit for me, but it might not be a big hit for you if you spend a lot of time using a mouse or a trackball that is already comfortable for you. Of course, if you're really into the field, then you're going to have this specialized equipment for doing video editing, or you'll have like a space mouse for doing CAD work. Like, sure, those tools exist. If I have not mentioned it, then I think it might have been intended that you use the trackball with your palm and not with your fingers. So if that's something that you do or intend to do, then I guess the whole finger joint wearing out thing is probably not going to be an issue for you. But also, if you want to do a lot of gaming and this is going to be your only keyboard, I would probably not use this keyboard. I'd look for something else. And if you want just simple plug and play experience, then definitely this keyboard is probably not for you. And of course, I think it's worth mentioning that this is a split keyboard with a thumb cluster. And if you've never used that before, then it is a totally different experience than using a traditional keyboard. So if you need something where you get that keyboard and you need to be immediately productive, then I mean, I stay away from split keyboards altogether. Don't do that, actually. It's totally worth the investment to learn how to use a thumb cluster. But that is just my opinion. In fact, all of these things are my opinions, and I'd love to hear what your thoughts are down in the comments below. And if you've made it to the end of this video, then you are a very special individual, and I don't mean the bad kind of special. Thanks for watching, and if you found this informative, then do me a favor and hit that like button. These videos take a lot of work, so I really appreciate that. And with that said, as always, I hope to see you in the next one.